Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our event tonight. Thank you for coming. I know there is kind of a lot of competition out there because all the clubs are open, all the pubs are open, and it's beautiful weather. So thank you for joining us nevertheless. I appreciate it very much. I'm the host of tonight's event. My name is Mario Daniels. I'm a historian working for the Deutschland Institute, which is also the sponsor of this event, in cooperation with the German Embassy in Den Haag. Tonight we are in for a kind of a history of science treat. Our guest, Stefan Wolff, comes from Munich to us, and it's my honor to introduce him in a brief manner. So Stefan Wolff is a senior researcher at the Research Institute for the History of Technology and Science at the Deutsches Museum in Munich. His research focuses on the history of physics in the 19th and 20th century. Wolff studied physics and gained the doctorate in the history of science. He is currently doing research on the history of the Deutsche Physikalische Gesellschaft during the time of the National Socialism. He is also writing a series of short biographies of murdered members of the German Physical Society, and is, on top of that, organizing memorial plaques for these people. Furthermore, he is preparing a biography of Arnold Berliner, former editor of the scientific magazine Naturwissenschaften, and one of the victims of the NS state. Tonight, Stefan Wolff will present some of his research on Haber, and without further ado, welcome Stefan Wolff.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for coming. It's my pleasure to give this talk tonight here, and I hope I can manage the technical points. So we are here. Haber, it's not only a multifaceted biography, but also a contradictory one. He was able to claim an important discovery for mankind with the realization of the ammonia synthesis. And you see him on the top left, there he has a model in his hand, a model of the apparatus used for ammonia synthesis. But he still considered the gas war as legitimate even after the war. You see the scene of the gas war in World War I and the Great War. He treated his collaborators with care. He was admired and revered by them, and you see the circle of collaborators. When he explained something at the blackboard, he had always a large group of collaborators and people who were engaged for the scientific subjects. And another point, he helped Einstein with his divorce, but failed as a husband himself. So, what will be our subject, our survey today? We speak about his youth, his education, till his PhD, his baptism in 1892, which is important in the way that it was not an opportunistic one, as we have many examples when people changed their faith because of their career. It was independent of that. Then, as he said himself, the best years of his life, the best 17 years at the Technical High School at Karlsruhe, where he succeeded to perform the ammonia synthesis in 1909. And then with this reputation, he got the best position in the world of this time to become a director of a newly founded Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, a budget with which he could do what he liked. He could choose his collaborators as he liked, with a director villa belonging to the upper class in Germany. And then we come to the war and the chemical warfare. And in this context, the failure of his marriage, the suicide of his wife, Clara Immerwahr, connected with some myths, some constructed stories. We will discuss this matter. And then after the war, he became the Nobel Prize for the ammonia synthesis. He appeared before a subcommittee of the German Reichstag, explaining his role of the chemical warfare. And we will discuss one example of his post-war research. A man who was able to make bread from the air could be able to get gold from the sea. Maybe. He didn't succeed in this respect, but it's a little story. And then we come to his resignation in 1933, his emigration, and his death. So let's start with the young Fritz Haber. He was born in 1868 in Breslau. His father Siegfried was a businessman trading with colors, who had married his cousin Paula, who died shortly after the birth of her first and only child. So Fritz grew up motherless, but with aunts, cousins, and the housekeeper, till his father married again. Soon Fritz was not the only child anymore, but had 3 half-sisters then. He attended the classical gymnasium and passed Abitur in September 1886. He had been quite enthusiastic about Latin and Greek and met outside school with classmates to read such texts like Evangelium Johannes, Josephus Flavius, Aristoteles' poetry, Platon's Politeia. But he made up his mind to study chemistry. This did not agree with the plans of his father, who wanted to see his only son as successor in his business. But Fritz could push it through, supported by an uncle, started his studies in winter term. Oh, the wrong direction. So he started with the studies in Berlin, Heidelberg, and Breslau, where he had his so-called voluntary year for the military. In Breslau, principally, there was the option to become Reserveoffizier, finally, which had a very high social reputation in Germany, especially in Prussia. However, being Jewish, Haber could not succeed in this respect. It was nearly impossible for Jews to become Reserveoffizier. And baptism had been no option at that time. 1.5 years later, he finished his dissertation. Oh, wrong direction again. So he had his PhD, passed his examination. Certainly his father organized some of the next stations, work in industry, a term at the Technical University in Zurich, and then in his father's business. Not a good decision for both. It was finished after a heavy dispute. They couldn't work together, father and son. He went to Jena without a position, just to extend his knowledge in Jena. And you see this little town with a church, which played a role. Haber's deep interest in philosophy led him to baptism. I have the document here and the transcription. Today, Dr. Fritz Haber, who belonged to the Jewish faith so far, born in Breslau on the 9th of December 1868, son of Siegfried Haber in said place, received the holy baptism in the local Michaeliskirche and today was admitted as a member of the Protestant Church after he has been taught in his faith and solemnly confessed to it before. So there may be a connection to his philosophy interests. It was not only an intellectual enjoyment, but mainly an approach to European intellectual history and its Occidental Hellenistic tradition. Therefore, this had been no decision to cut off his ties to his social environment or to Judaism as a social group. His next station was a technical high school, Technische Hochschule, Karlsruhe. We had to wait till December 1894 to get his first scientific position. He soon worked single-mindedly towards his habilitation. He was awarded the Venia Legendi in spring 1896. At the end of 1898, shortly before his 30th birthday, he was awarded the title of Associate Professor, which also qualified him for marriage in social terms. In 1901, he married the chemist Clara Immerwahr, whom he knew from former dancing lessons in Breslau. And in 1902, they had a son and started being a family. She had a similar social background, came from a Jewish family in Breslau, and had been baptized either. On the 1st of October 1906, the 37-year-old Haber was promoted to full professor of physical and electrochemistry at the Technical High School, Karlsruhe. And you see, he was able to build up a research group. Now I try to activate the pointer. You see him here. This is Haber. This young man will be mentioned in a few moments. It's a young British chemist, Le Rossignol, who played a role in the ammonia synthesis.
Can you try to speak in the microphone, please?
Oh, sorry. So you couldn't hear what I have said. I showed Haber in the center of this group, and on the left-hand side, the second on the left, is Le Rossignol, a British chemist who played an eminent role in the context of the ammonia synthesis. So we come to the ammonia synthesis. You see this is a chemical equation with the double arrow, which means both sides exist. However, the proportion on the right-hand side is very small. That's the ammonia, which was wanted for a long time, and it was considered nearly impossible to get it. So the chemical question, the technical question is to shift it to the right-hand side. How can we do it? It's necessary to have a catalyst in such a reaction, and you need a good catalyst working at the right temperature. The temperature should not be too high, otherwise ammonia composites again. You need a high pressure, a very high pressure, pressures which had not been practiced before. But they could manage it. They needed temperatures below 700 degrees and a pressure of 200 atmospheres, which initially did not appear to be technically feasible at first. In view of the knowledge of the use of such high pressures in other new technical processes, okay, so it's better now. Okay, Entschuldigung. Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay, I will try to do it better. So there was a need to combine temperatures below 700 degrees with a pressure of 200 atmospheres, which initially did not appear to be technically feasible at first. In view of the knowledge of the use of such high pressures in other new technical processes, such as air liquefaction, Haber, and together with his British collaborator Le Rossignol, resumed their work. They were able to experiment with such high pressures, thanks in particular to the skills of Le Rossignol, who, among other things, designed special valves required for the high pressure. They also used new catalysts, such as osmonium and uranium, at a working temperature between 500 degrees and 600 degrees. You see, several points have to come together. The right catalyst, the right temperature, the right pressure. But even under these conditions, the synthesis remained incomplete, which is why ammonia only had to be formed gradually and removed from the process in portions. This was achieved, that was a new concept, by a circulation process in which the ammonia produced was liquefied and removed by cooling, and the heat generated during the reaction was also fed back into the process. So it worked. They had a demonstration in July 1909, and here you see a model of this apparatus. There's a cross-section on the right-hand side, and you see the converter on the left-hand side. There's a place where the synthesis takes place, and the cylinder on the right, this is the cooling. And there the liquid ammonia comes out. It comes out of the process, and in the circulation it will be produced permanently. And that's the circulation process in which he succeeded, and the industrial form was done by Bosch, and so far you find this term of the Haber-Bosch process. And this was the success of the year 1909. Haber was a workaholic. He worked day and night, time-consuming, testing the limits of his physical resilience. This did not remain, as you may imagine, without effect on his marriage. He had a wife, he had a son, and he was working all the time in the laboratory. And his wife was a chemist herself. And this scientific success came at the price of failure in his private life. And there's a letter of his wife to a friend where she explained her situation. Remember the other part of the scientific success of her husband. What Fritz has gained in these 8 years, I have lost, and even more. And what is left of me fills me with the deepest dissatisfaction. So the main part of the negative conclusion can undoubtedly be attributed to Fritz's overwhelming opinion of himself in the house and in his marriage, next to which any nature that does not assert itself even more ruthlessly at his expense simply perishes. And that is the case with me. So you see, they had different sleeping rooms, they had problems to live together, or probably the man was satisfied with the situation, his wife was not. Haber had gained a considerable reputation then, was already mentioned in the context of the Nobel Prize. Insofar it came not as a surprise that he was a candidate for the directorship of the new scientific institution outside the universities, with free choice of research subjects, free choice of collaborators, with a large budget located in the Berlin suburb Dahlem. And here you see the inauguration. You will recognize the German emperor, of course, in the front, and then 3 men walking behind him, Harnack, the chemist Fischer, and the third was Fritz Haber. Haber was very ambitious. There was a competition by the Kaiser to design a device that indicated the danger of a fire damp in coal mines. If there's a competition, Haber thought that he must win the competition. After the failure of a chemical detection of the inert methane, which is causal for the catastrophes, Haber looked for the physical proof. He used the property that different gases produced different sounds. Haber won the monarch's favor with a pipe designed for this purpose. However, it was a good pipe, but not used in practice because it had to be readjusted after a few days, which just makes it unsuitable for this purpose. Here he is explaining his pipe. Haber had been involved in the Prussian Ministry of Culture's deliberations about Einstein's appointment to Berlin since the end of 1912. The institutional and financial framework appeared problematic. Haber knew how to find a solution. With a theorist like Einstein, there was no need for a separate institute. Haber offered to accommodate Einstein on the upper floor of his institute. Einstein accepted and moved to Berlin in spring 1914. There he was initially given an office on the 2nd floor of Haber's institute. You see the both on the staircase. And he reported enthusiastically, "A nice room at Haber's and an interesting mate." Sometimes they had breakfast together or discussed things while walking in the garden. The political tensions in summer 1914 did not dissolve, so war did not come unexpectedly. It was a sequence of steps where each of them inevitably led to the next one. You will know these things, but I repeat it here. It started with the assassination of the Austrian Crown Prince. Then there was an ultimatum to Serbia and breaking off the relations, the mobilization of Austria, the mobilization of Russia, Germany's declaration of war on Russia, Germany's declaration of war on France, and then for the German public, a disappointment, a surprise, England's entry into the war. Why? So the German nightmare since the foundation of the empire in 1871 was a two-front war. A two-front war should be avoided, or it should be decided very quickly on the Western Front. And there was a brilliant idea by the chief of the General Staff, Alfred von Schlieffen. It was brilliant, but it didn't work for several reasons. You see, there is a modification, not unimportant at this place here. In 1905, the Netherlands were touched. Moltke modified this plan to take the Netherlands out because of food supply and other practical reasons. But they invaded Belgium to avoid the frontier between France and Germany. So it was a strategic plan to defeat France by a pincer movement. Politically, it was a disaster because this was the reason that England entered the war, the violation of the neutrality of Belgium. But also strategically, it was a disaster, as the Germans could not fulfill their plans. They didn't go to the west. They could not keep the front, and the French could keep the line, which in history was designed as a miracle of the Marne. So everything changed unexpectedly for the Germans, because they were not prepared that a war of movement turned into a war of position, a war in the trenches. There had been no plans for a longer-term supply of raw materials in Germany. Up to that point, now took its toll. The trench warfare required a lot of ammunition, and there was a lack of it. Haber now worked in 3 fields in this situation. On the development of new explosives, on the production of salpeter, which was not only for the ammunition, but for agriculture, chemical and pharmaceutical industry, and also for Austria. And the solution was to use the Haber-Bosch process with an oxidation. And a new factory was built in Merseburg, the so-called Leunawerke, which are famous for this. Leuna because it was far away from the front, and so far a safe place. But there was an accident in his institute in December. Haber had just left the room. Just in the moment when he left the room, there was an explosion which nobody expected. They had some agents which were not so well known, and one of them had the test tube at his eye level. And so far he had no chance to survive. And the colleague next to him lost his hand. Haber could claim the status of a war debt for him to care for his family, which was an important social point. And there was no hope for national saltpeter because the East Asia fleet was destroyed in the Battle of the Falklands in December 1914. The Germans lost their fleet there, and so far there was no access anymore to Chile. So it had to be produced. And they succeeded in this way with the help of Haber. Haber had discussed this matter already before the war, and then Bosch gave the so-called saltpeter promise. He assured the Supreme Army Command that he would build up sufficient production of saltpeter if there was appropriate loans and a purchase guarantee. Haber played an important role in the contract negotiations. As the front stiffened after the Battle of the Marne, the German military attention turned not only to the ammunition problem, but also to new types of weapons, chemical weapons. A commission was formed at the beginning of October. The first tests were carried out with sneezing powder, then eye irritant, which was demonstrated on military training grounds at the beginning of January. It was used at the Eastern Front, but turned out as ineffective because the substance evaporated. Further attempts to tear gas projectiles were also unsuccessful. Until then, the military did not want any lethal effects, only irritants. But in December, they demanded something that would permanently incapacitate people. Haber then proposed the use of chlorine, which was available in large quantities and could be easily compressed in steel flasks. Haber was actually in favor of gas grenades, but ammunition was in short supply. This was trained during January 1915, but soon the chemical units posing as so-called disinfection crews started moving to their positions on the Western Front, reaching Ypres in February 1915. In the meantime, on Haber's urging, many of the officer positions of the gas units were staffed with scientists, including meteorologists. The first chlorine cloud attack on enemy positions took place on April 22nd at 17 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, 18 o'clock Central European Time, near Ypres. It's late, why not in the morning? It depends on the wind. It could succeed only when the wind turned to the northerly direction. 7 previous attempts had to be aborted because of unfavorable wind. Special conditions were needed: flat terrain, no forest, no rain. You see, it's a cloud moving to the front. And what was the result? 150 tons of chlorine from 1,600 big and 4,130 small cylinders, placed at a distance of about 1 meter from each other, covering about 6 kilometers of the front. The chlorine gas concentration achieved was about 0.5% at a distance of 50 to 100 meters from the cylinders. The first attack not only threw the Allied forces into panic, but reportedly injured about 5,000 and killed about 1,000. In addition, the Germans were able to capture 60 guns and a large force of territory. To no avail, however, as the German military was unprepared to take advantage of the breakthrough. And here you see the names of some famous scientists who joined Haber in this respect to the gas war. In spite of the success of the attack, it became clear that the dependence on the direction of the winds made gas clouds attacks too unpredictable and unreliable, a means upon which to base a new method of warfare. Haber celebrated the success and his promotion as a captain at a gathering in his directorial mansion in Dahlem. The gathering took place on the 1st of May 1915. Afterwards, during the night, from the 1st to the 2nd May, Clara Haber committed suicide. She shot herself with Haber's army pistol in the garden of their mansion. Apparently, Haber, sedated by his daily allowance of sleeping pills, didn't hear the shots, 2 shots. Clara was found dying by their 13-year-old son, Hermann. Most of the materials related to Clara's suicide were generated nearly 4 decades later. Mentions made in memoirs and personal correspondence of people who knew the Habers provide additional tidbits, albeit sometimes only between the lines. The coincidence of the suicide with the chlorine attack at Ypres and Fritz Haber's key role in it gave rise to speculation, and there were numerous contradictory versions in circulation. The Haber family treated the tragic event with utmost discretion, as a result of which there are no primary sources available, such as farewell letters, that would clarify the motive. Likewise, there are essentially no authentic contemporary testimonials available that shed light on this tragic event. The famous quotes that she called chemical warfare a perversion of science and a sign of barbarism are inventions of an American author of the 1940s. There's no source for it. We know about the situation of her marriage several years before. We know that she suffered under depression, and there may be also a disagreement about Haber's involvement in the German front, in the German war effort. We cannot exclude this, but in any case it could have been one of several more effects. Probably it is true that she detected that her husband had already a love affair with another woman. Suicides have rarely only one cause. In the 1990s, some literature made a political activist, a pacifist out of her, which is a speculation, lacking sources. Another controversy connected with Clara's suicide concerns Fritz Haber's behavior during the aftermath of the harrowing event. Haber's departure for the Eastern Front the same day, on the 2nd May, was often portrayed as a reckless abandonment of his 13-year-old son Hermann and a sign of carelessness and egotism. Haber was supposed to leave in the morning, but stayed until the evening when he was finally forced to depart. He inquired at the military headquarters whether, out of consideration of the unfortunate event, he could postpone his departure, but his request was denied. Here you see the newspaper announcement, and there is a monument in the garden erected in 2006, the place where she shot herself. The work in Haber's Institute consisted of searching the chemical literature for potential warfare agents. Attempts were then made to produce these synthetically according to the literature. Hundreds of chemicals were tested for their suitability for military use. Toxicity was only one criterion. The Haber Institute acted as a test center. Chlorine was less effective as a weapon, particularly as soon as simple countermeasures were introduced. The gas produced a visible greenish cloud and strong odor, making it easy to detect. After the use of chlorine, the switch was made to phosgene, which was considerably more toxic. From 1916, the firing of gas grenades by the artillery replaced the weather-dependent and coastly blast attacks, of which a total of 50 were carried out and which had devastating effects, particularly among the poorly protected Russian troops. The industry was ahead in testing mustard gas. It was 50 times more toxic than chlorine gas, was liquid at normal temperature, and caused burn-like skin injuries, eye irritation, and damage to the respiratory tract and lungs. Another department worked on Blue Cross warfare agents, which consisted of arsenic compounds. They were solid and turned into aerosols when fired with grenades, which penetrated the breathing filters of the masks. Such mask breakers were intended to cause the enemy troops to tear off the gas mask, which then exposed them to the deadly Green Cross warfare, the phosgene fired in combination. The other side of the gas war was the development of masks. Here you see the box where the different filters were in. You see that it was possible to produce enough masks for the whole Western Front in 1916, in January 1916. This was also a part of the production in the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. The increasing use of grenades and mines filled with warfare agents necessitated the expansion and new construction of so-called filling centers. So I need the arrow. Here you see Haber, the second of the left, in the uniform, and here with the gas grenades. Germany lost that war in November 1918. The Treaty of Versailles contained an extradition article according to which, in addition to the emperor, other persons who had violated the laws and customs of war were to be brought before foreign military courts. Germany undertook to extradite them. Haber was not sure whether he belonged to the group of people concerned. He disguised in some way. He had now a beard. Probably you can recognize him, but it's difficult now. Yes, he went for a few months to Switzerland because he was not sure if he was concerned. There was a list of 900 that was sent to Germany in February 1920. His name did not appear on a list published in German newspapers, so it's not quite clear. In the meantime, it had become known that he was to receive the Nobel Prize. Newspapers in France and Belgium described this as a scandal. You see, this is a document, and even if you don't know Swedish, you see on the top, on the right-hand side, you see the chemical equation, the ammonia synthesis. That was the reason for the Nobel Prize. So, and then I have a movie. I hope I can start it here.
I will start.
Now I need some help. So I think it's a photo, and we have to tell them it's not a photo, you can move. It's a little movie. And now they realize it. And as usually, Haber likes to talk. He's the one on the left-hand side. You will recognize him. The man in the center with the hat is Max Planck, and on the right-hand side, Max von Laue and Johannes Stark. After the war, the German Reichstag commissioned a committee to investigate the German Reich's behavior under international law. Within this framework, a subcommittee dealt with gas war in October 1923. Fritz Haber was questioned as a witness under oath. Quotation Haber: During the last months of 1914, I was involved by the army administration in the gas warfare experiments that had already begun. Since the beginning of 1915, I have had limited technical responsibility in the field of gas. Since the mid-1916, I have had full responsibility. I have never been concerned with the permissibility of gas weapons under international law. The chief of the General Staff apparently examined the matter personally. He left me in no doubt that there were limits for him under international law. He would never have approved the poisoning of food, wells or weapons, never authorized weapons or methods of fighting that caused useless suffering. He was undoubtedly convinced that his orders in the area of gas warfare were not in conflict with international law. A contrary opinion would have deterred me from cooperating. The only determination made in The Hague for the gas war gave me no cause for such a dissenting opinion. And he continued, June 1918, 20 to 30% of all American casualties were caused by gas. Due to the gas defenses, only 3 to 4% of gas illnesses resulted in deaths. This shows that the gas weapon is not only one of the most effective, but also one of the most human weapons. So he relied on state's orders, only vaguely acknowledged his own responsibility, and maintains the position that the gas weapon is human. Have a look at the Hague principles. There was a peace conference in 1899, at a time where nobody could really imagine what was possible 15 years later. So you have to look at the words, and lawyers will explain where are the gaps. No use of projectiles for the sole purpose of diffusing asphyxiating deleterious gases. So, it means this does not exclude non-toxic irritant gases, nor the blowing off. It's not written there. Blowing off is not forbidden of toxic gases, nor projectiles with explosives and toxic. It was only forbidden, only toxic. So there was an addendum in 1907, ban of poison and poisoned weapons, no unnecessary suffering. So, interpretation, that means no poisoning of drinking water, and unnecessary means disproportional to the military success. This permits soldiers, but not civilians. This was an interpretation. I come to his post-war research, to one example, which is interesting, I think. The enormous reparation payments imposed on Germany by the victorious powers. This was an aspect which activated Haber's creativity. It was known that the water in the world's oceans contained very small quantities of gold, but the figures differed widely. So there was an estimation of 6 milligram per cubic meter, which would mean that the ocean contained billions of tons of gold. The task now was to develop a process for extracting the gold. Just a few milligrams would cover the operating costs, and anything more promised rich profits. The aim was to find reliable methods of analysis and measurement, and finally a process for removing gold from seawater. So Haber collected samples of ocean water from the North, the Baltic Sea, from the South Atlantic. This provided confirmation of such a value of 5 milligram. So he he made expeditions in the North Atlantic, in the South Atlantic, with the laboratory on the boat. This shows him on his tour to South America. He had people who financed this project, because that man who made bread from the air, he could make gold from the sea. Why not? But it was a failure because the amount of gold was much smaller than expected. But he developed in this context new methods of microchemistry. He could measure less than 1 of the billion gram. So on the micro level. And this led to the result that the gold they found was not gold from the sea, but from the instruments they used, with the small quantities. So one employee's high results were due to the fact that he kept taking his gold-plated glasses on and off. So Haber had to admit the failure. But scientifically, he had achieved new methods of measurement. He was admired by his colleagues, collaborators, and so there was a large celebration of the 60th birthday. You can still see the Haberlinde, or the lime tree. And there's an inscription on the right-hand side. You see, to his 60th birthday, dedicated from his friends and colleagues. The events of 1933 changed everything. The so-called law for the restitution of the civil service, introduced the term of non-Aryans, people with one or more Jewish grandparents, who were to dismiss in all institutions of the public service. Haber's institute became a special target in the way that his collaborators had to dismiss even earlier than their colleagues at the universities. Haber himself could have been exempted as a combatant of the Great War. But it seemed impossible for him to dismiss his collaborators and to remain in office himself. Therefore, on April 30, he wrote his famous letter of resignation to the Minister of Education, effective on October 1st, declaring himself unable to accept the racial quality as a criterion of scientific employment. And there was a large farewell in the garden of his institute in July 1933. You will recognize him, but I show it. Here is Haber. During the following weeks, it became his main task to place his collaborators who had lost their positions in Germany. But there was also the question for him to find an adequate place abroad. Now it played a role that he had been acquainted with Chaim Weizmann, a colleague in chemistry and the president of the World Scientific Organization. They had met in Paris for the first time by chance in 1932, where Haber's son worked in a company whose owner was Weizmann's brother-in-law. Obviously, they liked each other, and Weizmann visited Haber at the end of the year 1932 in Berlin. In May 1933, the idea emerged that Haber might relocate to Palestine temporarily. In the meantime, he had to offer to continue his research as a guest in Cambridge. In a letter to Einstein, Haber described his isolation in the German society and his disappointment with the words, "I've never been so Jewish in my life as now." Einstein was pleased that Haber's former love to the blond beast, zu der blonden Bestie, had cooled down, and he hoped that Haber would not return to Teutonia. Haber suffered a heart attack after a visit of Weizmann in Zermatt in August 1933, and subsequently recovered in a sanatorium at the Lake of Constance, where he wrote Weizmann about his plans in Palestine. To restrict my stay in England to the shortest, to be able to join your invitation and to come to Jerusalem in the last quarter of the year. I can imagine that you may require me during my winter stay in Palestine and to establish physical chemical instruction. Haber arrived in Cambridge on November 7. On December 15, he could even hold a colloquium in his hotel room with his former collaborators from Berlin, who had visited him. Haber had found a place abroad, but this did not mean that Palestine was no option anymore. He was still strongly interested to support the setting of physical chemistry at the Hebrew University, as well as the newly founded Daniel Sief Institute in Rehovot, which later became the Weizmann Institute, and to spend a few months there. He left Cambridge on January 26 for holiday in Switzerland. He had changed his plans as he felt too weak to travel to Palestine, what he had really intended only some weeks earlier. He asked Weizmann for a postponement of his visit and saw him in London on his way to Switzerland. He arrived in Basel on January 29, suffered a heart attack, and died a few hours later. In his testament, there was the sentence, "In war and peace, as long as it was granted to him, a servant of his fatherland." And according to his last will, the urn of Clara was put in his grave a few years later. I come to the postface. He had 2 children in his second marriage, 1 son, Ludwig, which always was called Lutz. And he has written a comprehensive history of the gas war in 1986. The responsibility for the gas weapon weighed eerily on him and still weighs on his name today. It had neither the expected success nor was it glorious. Thank you for your attention and interest.
Thank you, Dr. Wolff, for this really interesting talk and presenting a lot of interesting material. I'm pretty sure there are a few questions from the audience, so it's time for the Q&A. Please ask questions if you like. Okay. Don't be shy. Oh, yeah. Henri.
Thank you for an interesting lecture. I have 2 questions. First, I was wondering, did Haber, after the terrible things of the chemical warfare, do any philanthropic work, like Nobel himself, set up the Nobel Prizes? And wasn't he married a second time? Actually, you did mention the second marriage. So what was that? But his wife divorced him, so I wonder what the reason for that was.
I have acoustic problems. This was a question about his second wife.
Ja, die second wife and if, ob ähnlich wie Nobel, also sowas wie eine Stiftung oder sowas aufgebaut hätte.
No, there's no foundation of Haber. And his second marriage was from 1917 to 1927. And it's, how to describe it, the partnership didn't work. It was not a political, not a reason which can be mentioned. 2 persons who could not continue the marriage. It happens. No dramatic matter like the first marriage. And it goes to all his letters till his death, the problem with immigration, because he had to satisfy the financial requirements of his wife. That was a problem till his death. But I cannot tell anything in detail about the marriage. She was a secretary of the Gesellschaft of 1914, the Society of 1914. There they had become acquainted And one of the legends is that she had some intimate contact in the night when Clara committed suicide. One of the employees told the story 40 years later, that this was the initial moment for her suicide. She was quite different. She had no problem to be Frau Geheimrat, problem for Clara. When a colleague came to the house and the young lady opened, he thought it's the maid, not Frau Geheimrat. She was not representative. The second wife had no problem in this respect. She has written a book about her life as Haber, which is full of travel descriptions, which is the climax of her life, to travel to Japan, to Egypt. But I cannot explain what was the reasons that say. Probably Haber was not a man for marriage. I do not know. I cannot say more in this respect.
Thank you very much for your very interesting lecture. I have a question about his relation to business, so to speak, because this Haber-Bosch procedure, of course, was very fortunate, I think, for the family Bosch, who could produce a lot of chemical products, and not even during the war, but also, I think, after the war, they developed a whole agricultural industry of fertilizers and DDP, etc. So the poison gas evolved in a sort of industry to protect agriculture against animals and that kind of things. So he could have been very rich, I think. But he didn't. He became rich. Okay.
He became rich. He became rich indeed, because for every ton of ammonia he get a provision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he didn't have a very intensive relation with the industry, or?
Yes, he had.
Okay.
Yes, and he was, one of his abilities was that he was a manager and he was a negotiator. He was very good in this respect.
And in his habitus, he was still a professor, or not? Oh.
He was a professor at Berlin University, honorary professor, not a full professorship. That was Berlin University was autonomous, and so far the chemists there didn't like to have Haber as a full professor there. But he could educate. He could students could make their PhD. It's enough to be an honorary professor. Like many people in the industry, they had this honorary professorship just for the purpose that their students could make their PhD. And the older became private lecturers, Privatdozenten. So there was a strong connection between university and the Haber Institute. But not in the formal sense that he was an ordinary professor.
Thank you very much for your lecture. So how is Haber then perceived now in science and society for the atrocities that he supported, but also, of course, on the other hand, the achievements that he did? Is there some kind of iconoclasm, or is he just perceived as a person of his time, and the critique does not outweigh the support for his scientific achievements?
In 1953, the institute was named Fritz Haber Institute till today. And it was done under the impression of the destruction of the institute, of the Nazi persecution. And so far, the other things came in the background. It did not play such a role at that time. At that time, he was a victim of the Nazis, and the whole institute was a victim of the Nazis. He has built up this institute to a world-famous institution, and so far that was the point, to remember this aspect. And the gas war has been a subject only in recent times, And there were people who demanded that the institute should change its name. So it's still an open debate. In some way, it has been settled that the majority or historians who have written about this, that the result was we will not change this, but maybe in the future it will come again. So it's more aware than in former times. So it's probably I was able to transform this situation, that he's not a bad guy, he's not a good guy, he's everything in different times. And it's difficult to weigh. It's difficult to say one is more important than the other. And we have to relate it to the time. For example, his colleagues in England who worked on gas warfare saw in him a colleague. He was not an outsider in the science community for this.
Just one more follow-up question, because it just is kind of obvious, because a couple of days ago, of course, at the Oscar presentations, Oppenheimer won the most, the film Oppenheimer won the most Oscars. And the name Oppenheimer is now in every news outlet and known in society. Someone who was not so well known before this movie came out, of course. But are there some parallels that you could see possibly of the figures that are tragic, of course, in there, or definitely, figures who are ripped between maybe their positions. Haber did not seem to be, to see it as so problematic, his role in warfare, as Oppenheimer did later on.
Yes.
But otherwise, do you see any other parallels here?
First of all, Oppenheimer didn't join the army. You have seen the movie. He didn't have a uniform. It was essential for the scientists not to become members of the army. Haber was proud to wear a uniform. Haber was part of the military. Haber thought that Germany fought for his survival, as many people at that time, attacked from all sides. Oppenheimer, I think, from point of view of today, yes, but even at that time, there was a threat of a Nazi bomb at that time. It was not unrealistic, because this was an invention in Germany, the splitting of the uranium, and it was known that people were working in this area, the Uran Club, Uranverein. And so far, it was not quite sure what would happen in Germany. So you have this scene in the movie where he said, we would have preferred to bring the bomb to Germany, not to Japan. It was the enemy which was the motive for this work. And Oppenheimer, that's in some ways a tragedy of him. He himself didn't regard it in this way. He tried to stop the matter, because this is also the matter with the gas. We have gas and we have countermeasures. We have masks, we have mask breakers. And so far, Oppenheimer was one who said, stop at this point. It does not bring anymore, because if you have a better weapon, the other side will have it also. And so far, there is no end, no use. And so far, the movie shows Oppenheimer, as I understand, as a person of morality. Haber was not broken in this way. He did not... At one point in 1917, he said to Ludendorff, we should use mustard gas only then when we can be sure that the war will be over in a short time. Otherwise, the other side will use it also. And you know, in the Second World War, gas was not used. not from the Allied forces, not from Germany. I learned that Churchill considered it really at the end of the war. But to come back to the situation, Haber and Oppenheimer, I think Haber cannot claim this message Oppenheimer gave. He was not broken in the sense he said it's a human way to have war. He didn't regret.
Okay. I have a question about the part of about his Jewish identity and his baptism, basically. So I'm kind of surprised that he toyed around with this idea of going to Palestine in 33, because the quote you had where he said, I never felt more Jewish than today, sounded quite miserable, right? And so a person of his renown would have probably have a lot of different options where he could have gone. Why was Palestine actually so interesting to him? Did he rediscover his Jewish identity, or was it more of a strategic move? Also, because it opened some doors which made his life easier, or what was going on there? Is he reverting to his Jewish past in 1933, and was Palestine really option number one? And because of that,
yes, he came back. And he wrote in a very negative way about Max Born, which gives a light on his attitude, on its own attitude, because he considered Born's attitude as rather bad, born of Jewish origin but far from Judaism. He said it's not an idea to go to Palestine. I have nothing to do with that. And Haber, baptized Haber, wrote to Heitzmann, it's awful, these assimilated Jews. They don't feel it, they don't know it. He has changed his position because of his disappointment about German society. He really believed to be a part of it, and now he realized that he was wrong all the time. He had been wrong, obviously, all the time. It did not happen so much, but now he did not belong anymore to this society. No one of his former so-called friends helped him in this situation, not even by words. So he felt isolated, he felt disappointed, and as I tried to indicate, his baptism didn't mean that he had no ties to Judaism anymore. In the 1920s, he had some correspondence with Einstein, and he was afraid that some actions of Einstein could amplify anti-Semitism in Germany. And he told Einstein he should be careful about his traveling to foreign countries in a certain situation. Just as a Jew, you should not do that. So you see, he was not out. He felt, still he felt some connection to it. And in the situation of 33, his first option was England. Palestine would have been a situation to help to build up. He was aware that he was ill, that he was weak, and he thought he could, for a few years, he could help to build up this situation. And some of his students, some of his assistants would do the next step. And there was a kind of attraction that Weizmann and Haber had sympathies for each other, politically and personally. So things came together.
Where did Haber stand politically at the end of the Weimar Republic? So he was obviously kind of a rather conservative patriot. do we know which party he supported or voted for? What was his position towards the National Socialists? Because it sounds like, you know, he found out in 1933 that there was anti-Semitism in Germany. And of course, it was clear much earlier, I would argue. So the way you presented it was almost like April 1933, the law of the reconstruction of the public service was kind of the breaking point. But that's not quite convincing. So what was his position in the end of the Weimar Republic? Where was he politically? What was he thinking about the National Socialists? Do we know anything about that?
He ignored it. He ignored National Socialism. And he was aware, as I mentioned, the situation when he contacted Einstein about anti-Semitism just in the beginning of the 20s. No, he was aware of it, but the point was that even his friends, his colleagues, with whom he collaborated in industry, just the people of industry, that even those people who had quite independent positions still at that time, that even those persons were not with him in that situation. He was aware of the background, but he thought that the elite of German society, with whom he was so close, that those people would help him. And they didn't. They ignored him. They ignored the situation. And so he felt so isolated and he fell out of... So Einstein, the blonde beast, that was... Einstein said, I had no such illusions like you. Einstein was always an outsider. He didn't feel as a part of German society. It was not a problem of Einstein. He had no ideas that it could have been better. Haber had such illusions, and so far, yes, it was such a change in his attitude. Zionism became attractive to him. There was a dispute between Weizmann and Einstein, and he tried to mediate. And Einstein was surprised, just you will do that? So it came even for Einstein as a surprise, this change of Haber's attitude.
My name is Lukin. Sorry. Based on the discoveries of Haber, Zyklon B was developed. In how far is that still held against him as a Jew, which is very cynical, of course?
It was a matter of pest. Oh, sorry. In World War I, one of the main subjects was pest control. The food supply was in danger because of insects, and so far they need some pest control, and he developed this at that time. That people later used it in a different context.
There's no direct connection, you say?
What means direct connection? When in World War I, he had... Pardon?
Chemically, I mean. Oh, sorry. Chemically, I mean. Do I understand you well? If you are saying Zyklon B has nothing to do with the discoveries of Haber in making poison gas?
No, he developed it in the context of pest control.
Yeah. Okay.
In World War I.
But given the fact that it was later used to destroy the so-called pest of the Jews, and he being a Jew, what does this connection mean for his reputation? That's what I ask.
Nothing, as it had been developed in a different context. And so far...
the world doesn't always function in a rational way.
Okay, but you can use a knife to cut the bread or to kill...
I understand you.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes, but you are right that he developed this. in World War I as pest control. And the company the company of that time was also responsible then Degesch in the Nazi time. And so far you have a continuity in industrial production. This is correct.
But it touches upon the fact of the thing that scientists are curious people who invent things, and they are never fully aware of the consequences. I mean, the poison gas, of course, was a horrible invention.
But it was necessary to gas the mills, for the gassing of the mills, to preserve the cereals. Something.
I'm interested to know more about Haber and Einstein. You mentioned that they wrote letters to each other, knew each other well, but how did they meet? Did they work together scientifically on projects? What was the scientific relationship between Einstein and Haber?
They met for the first time in 1912 at the Naturforscherversammlung in Karlsruhe. At that time, Einstein was working on quantum theory of solids, of molecular heat, and this subject had an overlap with physical chemistry. And so far, this was a reason to get Einstein to Berlin. That raised interest there. Nobody knew at that time that he was more interested in developing his general relativity. That was not a point of overlap with Haber, but his former work was interesting for Berlin and especially for Haber, and that was a motivation to bring him to Berlin.
Yes, I'm very curious if you have a bigger explanation for this huge concentration of very talented scientists who all got the Nobel Prize and had so many breakthroughs in such a small square meter of Berlin, so to speak, around 1900. Well, could you explain why there was such a big concentration of scientific discoveries as well in Berlin or in Germany in general around 1900?
It's a large story. It's the story of the academic situation in Germany, with the federal construction that every country had its own university, and so there was a large number of scientists, of academic educated scientists in Germany.
But that was also in 1850 the case, or 1850 and around 1900 you see so many discoveries, a sort of new scientific revolution.
But your question was, why did it happen in Germany in 1900? And you had this collaboration of different institutions. For example, quantum theory had a lot to do with the measurements in the Physical Technical Reichsanstalt, in the Imperial Institute. And these measurements had to be interpreted, and Planck did it. And so far, these developments were connected with each other. And there were a large number of institutions in Germany at that time, and just with the foundation of the German Empire, this was amplified. And as you have seen, the emperor, it had in the inauguration of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, it was a matter of the state. It had such a high priority. There was money, because science was power. And this did understand even the emperor. He was proud. When Röntgen detected the rays, I'm proud that this had taken place in Germany. So it had a high prestige. And the professors were at the top of the social level. So titles like Geheimrat, Frau Geheimrat. So you have to represent a social class in some way. If you come to Dahlem and see these old villas, these were little kings at that time. So the reputation was high, there was money, there was supply, There were young people coming to Germany from all over the world at the time. Probably it's an explanation.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then give a big round of applause to our guest, Stefan Wolff. Thank you.